Scottish Government has got the Scottish Greens and Lib Dems on board to pass its budget. The Finance Secretary, Shona Robson, will table a series of amendments to the budget bill to meet the demands of the two parties. The Greens pushed for an expansion of free school meals to S1 to S3 pupils who receive the Scottish Child Payment in 8 council areas. The Lib Dems, well, they'll tell us themselves. We're joined by the Scottish Liberal Democrat leader, Alex Cole-Hamilton. Morning.
How are you, Calum?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Good to have you on the pod.
We'll
talk about your success on the Kamala Harris campaign before we let you go. But let's start with the budget, shall we? Just outline for us, Alex, what you've got. What have you secured in this Scottish Government budget, which means that you can now support it?
Well, there were 2 baskets, if you like, one of which was revealed today, which comes on top of the rather significant set of wins we got in the draft budget in early December. Covering what came yesterday, we pressed very hard for big money to back services focused on those very unfortunate babies who, in any given year in Scotland, are born addicted to drugs. Research by my party showed there's 1,500 of them been born since 2017. This was personal for me because before politics, I was a youth worker. I was working for Apple Hour, which is the charity that delivers these services for babies who are born showing the signs of drug addiction. That's uncontrollable crying, that's trembling, it's abject distress, and it's the worst possible start in life. So I'm delighted that there's some serious money behind that. So too, money for colleges, particularly in terms of the skills that Scotland's economy needs, whether that's renewable technology and social care. So millions of pounds behind that. And indeed more money for hospices, more money for councils. But this is really the cherry on the cake for us after huge hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment announced in December for Liberal Democrat priorities that would not have been in the budget, whether that is, for example, money for local healthcare, so you can see a GP at the first time of asking, or an NHS dentist near you, whether that's a winter fuel allowance for pensioners, movement on hospitality business rates, long COVID. You guys have heard me talk about long COVID many, many times. And a string of capital projects as well, like the Belford Hospital in Lochaber, the Eye Pavilion in Edinburgh, the Gilbert Bain Hospital in Shetland. So a smorgasbord, if you like, of strong Liberal Democrat priorities. Obviously, we believe in our heart of hearts the change Scotland needs is a change of government, but it's very difficult to force an election in the Holyrood context. So it's important, I think, for in a minority administration situation to act like grown-ups. That's what we've done.
Yeah, act like grown-ups. That's interesting because we had the First Minister and Deputy First Minister on the pod at the start of the year, and obviously that was when the budget process was kind of ramping up again for the new year. And John Swinney said that his door was always open for further talks on the budget. And I just wonder, Alex, how you found the process. Has it been a relatively friendly, consensual discussion? Has there been argument? Has it been difficult? How would you describe it?
No, it has. And I think that, one of the secrets of Scottish politics is because there's only 129 of us in Holyrood, we all by and large pretty well get on when the cameras are off. So that continued, that kind of green room mentality continued in those negotiations. It's obviously there are areas of profound difference in our politics, but because we were trying to get something done, some good done, and like whether that's for neonatal abstinence syndrome or long COVID or whatever, these are serious issues. So I think our constituents would expect us to leave the tribalism at the door and come to an agreement. So it was a kind of a revelation for me because I've ostensibly been involved in budget negotiations since I was first elected to Parliament, but there's a theatre in that, and actually, there's always you've got a thought at the back of your head saying they don't need us or we wouldn't touch this with a barge pole. But for the first time since I became leader, certainly, this was a process where we thought, actually, we potentially could do some good here.
Yeah. Andy, can I come to you on this? Because there's the kind of, what you've been talking about for a few weeks, the reality on the ground. Will we feel a difference from all of this as people living it every single day? And there is the politics bit of it, which Alex is outlining for us here, the negotiation, the back and forth. Who wins politically in this context? Can we say it's a win for the Scottish Parliament and the process and the idea that they can work together to get things done?
So on the latter point, I think, it's all marginal. I don't think it's going to turn politicians into popular rock stars overnight, it must be said. But I do think it's a win for the Parliament when we see in a post-referendum environment. I think it's a win for the Parliament and a win for devolution when we see a Unionist Party and a Nationalist Party working together. So I think yes to that latter point. I think that is a good thing. Ultimately, John Swinney is winning at the moment, okay? Since he took over, he's clearly stabilised the SNP. With the assistance of Keir Starmer, he's also taken what was basically a two-horse race and turned it into a pretty substantial lead for him and for the SNP with a year or so to go before the election. So I think there's no question about the fact that John Swinney is going to be seen as the winner from this. But I do think, I give Alex and the Lib Dems a lot of credit in what they have done here. I think they've made the right decision early on to engage in the process. I think we saw hints of engagement already. I've mentioned this before on the podcast. It wasn't much mentioned at the time, but it was really down to Alex and colleagues that Kate Forbes managed to become Deputy First Minister, because that vote to allow her to become Deputy First Minister could have gone a different way. And the Lib Dems, I think, Alex will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the attitude was basically, it's reasonable as a Parliament to give the nominee a chance to do this job, and we're going to allow that to happen. And I think the Lib Dems have put themselves in a good position by backing this budget and by showing they can work with the government. I think they put themselves in a good position to do it again next year and to extract more next year. And then we're into an election which, as we've seen from the polling that Holyrood Sources and True North have done over the last couple of weeks with Servation and with John Curtis, this is a messy, messy election. And out of the back of this election, who knows who's going to have the opportunity to influence what's in the government. So, I think by and large, I think it's been a good process. Clearly, John Swinney's the biggest winner out of this, but I think it's been a good process for the Lib Dems. And I think one thing to look out for, I'm interested to get Alex's views on it as well. In the letter that Shona Robertson sent to the Finance Committee, it specifically said that the government and the Liberal Democrats specifically would have further engagement on the infrastructure investment plan. Now, we've talked a lot about infrastructure on this podcast before. It is one of the biggest problems that Scotland has. It's a massive inhibitor to the rollout of renewables. And the ability to do something on that and to push the governments further on that is potentially very significant.
Alex?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Firstly, I listened to your episode on the polling, excellent polling research you guys did. I think the untold story of that was that I think we're at least trebling our seats in the new Parliament to come. So we're going to return with strong Liberal voices, and that's an opportunity to do more of that grown-up politics. Yeah, the kind of granular detail of the budget announced yesterday, which will be laid before Parliament next week, is only half the story, because we've won serious commitments on infrastructure. By and large, they are health infrastructure, but we are a party that's dedicated to things like the dualling of the A9 and the A96, and that's because we're not a party of motorists, we're a party of road safety. These roads are lethal, and they are actually starving off economic growth for the Highlands and the far north. So they're really important to us. So too are the antiquated healthcare systems. Beatrice Wisher, who's my lovely colleague from from Shetland, told me that the Gilbert Bain Hospital in Lerwick is so old and so dilapidated that the lifts in that building can only be repaired by one person in the whole of the British Isles. And those lifts broke down in the summer while that guy was on holiday. Yeah. So they had to literally either keep people on the ground floor or carry them upstairs. That was the nature of it. That, I think, says a lot about the state of our NHS. So and just to reflect on your Kate Forbes point, we abstained actually in that vote, but that I think that the Tories came to us saying, "Oh, we can defeat it. We can more chaos," and there's a point at which you say, "Come on, guys, we've actually got to get stuff done here, and we just can't keep throwing spanners in the works of government." And people have turned away.
Geoff?
Yeah, not too much to add. I think if I were Anna Sarwar, I'd be looking at Alex Cole-Hamilton now thinking that's the way you do it. I don't understand Labour's positioning on this in terms of abstaining so early in the process. They've made NHS their key issue, and so therefore I would have expected them to come up with some sort of ask. Even if it was to be rebuffed by the SNP, at least you made an ask and it gives you a platform for discussion. I think that's good politics when you're going through a budget process, and I think Alex Cole-Hamilton and the Liberals have extracted quite a lot, given their relatively small size. I don't say that to be disparaging, but given their parliamentary group, they've done pretty well. And it gives them a platform to go into the summer recess where you can say you've delivered all these things and then beyond into the election campaign in earnest. So I don't think we can add too much to that. I suppose my question to you though, Alex, is you mentioned our poll and that you've forecast to treble your seats, which is absolutely right, but you're not changing positions in the Parliament because reform are on the rise. And I suppose to Andy's kind of alliteration on coalitions, I just want to understand, I assume you would never consider forming any sort of coalition, informal or formal, with the Reform Party.
No. And I think we've got to take the rise of reform very seriously. But I don't accept that this is some kind of lurch to the right in terms of Scottish politics or UK politics for that matter. I think that a lot of people are considering reform because they represent they are a disruptor in our politics. They represent change. They represent something new. And there's a lot of people who I think are absolutely scunnered with the status quo, with the old party system. They hoped for something new with Labour. They've been sorely disappointed. So yeah, you can't blame them for wanting to try something new. And of course, Reform have a wind behind them, but that's a wind largely of the fact that the mainstream media seems obsessed with them and constantly platforms them in a way that I don't think is necessarily deserved. But it doesn't mean that the people voting for Reform are anti-immigration or deeply right-wing. I think they just want change. They want something new. And we've shown in the general election, with Lib Dems getting our best result in over 100 years, in the council by-elections right across Scotland and increased polling, Lib Dems are back as well. And we could be the change that those people are looking for.
I just maybe have one follow-up. I mean, I think we've intimated this before about your willingness potentially to enter a coalition. Back when we spoke previously, that was looking odds on it be the Labour Party, but perhaps it might be the SNP. Long way to go, obviously. I take it you'd like to be Deputy First Minister.
Well, listen, I didn't get into politics to cart from the sidelines. I mean, I don't leap out of bed every morning thinking, how do I become Deputy First Minister? But I don't fear it either. But I will say, and I have said this several times, and this is going to disappoint Andy because I've heard him say this on the podcast, that there's a possibility that I will be Deputy First Minister to John Swinney's First Minister. Nothing could be further from the truth. I've said, and I'll repeat it, that no Liberal Democrat will take ministerial office in an SNP-led administration. Why? Because 20 years on, I think Scotland needs a change of government. I don't think if they needed us, I think that they would have slipped back to a certain degree where the people of this country had rendered a judgment that was rendered in July as well, when I think the SNP were told that the people of Scotland were looking for something different. That doesn't mean that in a parliament of minorities we won't continue to act like grown-ups. So no Deputy First Minister for me in an SNP-led administration, but obviously if they're still the largest party, if they still hold power, we will get things done. We'll work to find a way through.
So that's really interesting. There are no circumstances under which you can foresee that you would enter a coalition with the SNP. None whatsoever. I mean, you said you wanted to affect change. Surely you want to affect change by being in government and being in charge.
I think I can say that categorically. And the reason for that is severalfold. Firstly, when you talk about John Swinney being the winner right now and having settled the waters of the SNP, and that is true, but actually if your polling, for example, shows that it's not because the SNP are going up, it's because everybody else is falling down around there is, apart from the Lib Dems. And Reform, I suppose. So I think that the public, and if you go door knocking, I do more door knocking than most people. When you meet people who are nationalist by persuasion, they're grudgingly still voting for the SNP. There isn't a massive resurgence saying, oh, thank goodness John Swinney's in charge, now I can confidently vote SNP anymore. It's just like, I don't know what I'll do. I may vote SNP, but my goodness, they don't deserve it. And that's because people can see day by day, that their mum can't get a hip operation, their child is waiting for ADHD diagnosis. After 20 years, this is a government that has failed. I think, and remember, we still have quite recent cause to be anxious about unpopular coalition and taking power for power's sake. So I think, I can say that with confidence. There won't be a Lib Dem SNP coalition.
Really interesting, Alex. Thank you for insight on that. I do just want to ask, we're talking about, a bit of a win here for the Lib Dems when it comes to the budget. I note that Kamala Harris isn't the president of the United States at the time of speaking.
That's a great...
And the last time we heard from you on this podcast, you were campaigning for her. What went wrong?
I was your own foreign correspondent coming
we loved
live
that, by the
from
way. It was
Scranton.
great.
I enjoyed doing it, and I really enjoyed my trip over there. It was utterly doomed, obviously, but I think that I could, although I said that, the precinct that we were campaigning in was won by the Democrats. Look, I was going door to door, and actually the day I spoke to you or recorded that for you, I've been knocking doors in a trailer park outside of Scranton, and we've been given a list of registered Democrats. So this should have been pretty friendly door knocking, right? 50% of the people in that trailer park I had on my list were defecting to Trump. Really? So it was pretty clear that day to me, this was doomed. This was really doomed. But yeah, I had to try. And by the way, if anyone's interested in buying a Tesla, I'm trying to get out of the Elon Musk market as well at the moment. So
Are you?
Yeah.
What? So you own a Tesla right now and you want rid of it?
I bought it in 2019 before Elon became completely deranged. So yeah, I've left Twitter. I'm trying to leave Tesla as well. So if anyone's in the market, contact
just two things to pick up on that. Then, firstly, Alex, I'll message you on WhatsApp about the Tesla. But
shameless, Maciver.
Secondly, and I mean not to get into this too much because we'll cover this, I'm sure, a lot throughout the next year. But the people in that trailer park, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, I would say would be very attracted to the triple message that Trump and actually populists all around the world give now routinely, and which Reform will give as well, which is net zero makes you poor, you don't need wokery, and immigrants are taking your jobs. Because that would have registered in that trailer park with Dems just as much as it would have with Republicans, and that is what mainstream parties need to understand and counter.
I think that's right. The one thing I didn't hear much of the woke stuff. I mean, I heard cost of living and immigration, people talking about immigration as an invasion. I actually think that the woke stuff is a bit of a false flag. I don't think it moves votes. I think it's just part of that basket policies that populist right embrace these days, but I don't think it moves a lot of votes. I think for me, the thing that really, I obviously I'm a natural, I'm given to hope. I'm a Liberal Democrat. You have to be very hopeful as a Liberal Democrat. But on the day of the actual count, I went to my friend's house. We were going to stay up all night and watch it. And as CNN do, the great thing about American politics is they will reveal an exit poll before all the polls are closed. So just when the Eastern Seaboard stops voting, they'll start going through their exit poll. And the thing that jumped out immediately is that 75% Americans didn't agree with the statement, my life is better than it was 4 years ago. Yeah. You don't get to stay in power, or your team doesn't get to stay in power if that's the case. It's what Ronald Reagan did with Jimmy Carter. He said, even though Jimmy Carter was a much better debater, he said, is your life better than it was 4 years ago? To which the answer was resolutely no. So I think the writing was on the wall for Kamala Harris long before she became the presumptive nominee.
Alex, it's really good to catch up with you. What is an important time, of course, with the Scottish budget process, but nice to chat about these other things too. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
And Andy, you'll be in touch about the Tesla.
And to officially join the Lib Dems, you may have heard Andy.
Yes, he already is.
Yeah,
He's a candidate.
Well, but the problem is, of course, Alex, that I was, I'm not sure about your position on an SNP coalition. I think we'll talk about that when you leave for the rest of this podcast. We might just mention that there. I don't know if that's the right position for you to take, but I definitely notwithstanding that, we will talk about the Tesla.
Alex, there's no way that Andy's going to stand for Liberal Democrats, not because he doesn't like you. I think he is a closet Lib Dem, but because his reputation as an expert couldn't take getting hammered as a Tory and then hammered as a Liberal. So I think it's quite obvious he won't do that.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Shall we start, Andy, on the point you just left us on, the coalition idea, which Alex Cole-Hamilton said no Lib Dem would be a minister in an SNP government. He would not join a coalition with the SNP. He seemed pretty certain, pretty categorical on that.
I get his argument. His thinking clearly is we'll be punished if we go into a coalition with the SNP, because after 2 decades in government, the SNP are going to be so unpopular that if we prop them up, we'll get punished for it. I suppose the argument against that is to say, well, if they win another term in power, it means they can't be that unpopular. And obviously, John Swinney and Kate Forbes, as we know from the polling that we did, are the most popular politicians in the country. Doesn't mean they're popular, it's all relative here. But they're the most popular politicians in the country, and it means that the country as a whole doesn't think anybody else is going to do the job any better. So I suppose that's the one counterbalance to that. The concern I would have about Alex's position is that the most polling suggests that the SNP clearly will not get a majority, and what people consider to be the most obvious agreement, i.e. with the Greens, is actually not something that a lot of people in the SNP want anymore after what happened last time. And even that in itself probably won't get to 65 seats a majority anyway. So because of this disruption by reform, we've got potentially an incredibly open parliamentary situation after May 2026. And my thinking would simply be that when you have that sort of potential mess after 2026, when it's so open, closing doors now is probably not the right thing to do. You have to find a way to form a government one way or another, and I don't think anybody's going to be popular if they force a second election after the May 26th election. Government can't be formed. So all I would say, I'm just thinking, get Geoff's reflection on this. He's got a lot of experience of obviously minority government from 2007. I don't think closing doors at this point is that good an idea.
Yeah, look, he seemed to intimate that he would perhaps support them again, as he has done with the budget. But, he also said that you get into politics to change things. Well, you can change things for being in government. And he also mentioned the Liberal Democrat experience with the Tories at Westminster, or seemed to infer that was, disastrous for them and all the rest of it. That was disastrous for them because, all they got from that, in the public's views, was a referendum on voting reform, which nobody really cared about, to be quite honest with you. If he takes the experience of what he's done with the budget and applies that to potential coalition talks and say, we're extracting this, that and the next thing from it, I think that could be a platform for success. But why not at least, as Andy says, see how the budget goes down with the fact that Liberals support it? I guess that most folk don't really care that much, are quite pleased that a budget's going ahead and that public services are being funded, and think, well, actually, maybe we could do a deal. I just don't think you should close your options off. I agree. I mean, I think you get into politics to try and affect change, and you can do that from being in government much better than you can from opposition.
I think the other thing to remember as well, not to dwell on this too much, but there's the bubble and there's the public. And, cross-constitutional working is very unpopular in the bubble, and it's very unpopular with activists. The notion of a nationalist party and a unionist party working together. It's not that unpopular out in the real world. The real world doesn't care. The real world just wants stuff done. Yeah. And we saw from the polling that actually the most popular coalition amongst the public of all the ones that we asked them about was Labour and the SNP. So the public are giving a pretty strong signal there that they don't care that much about this.
Least unpopular.
Least unpopular. I mean, this is politics, so everything is the least unpopular because we're talking about politicians here. It's always the lesser of many evils. But I think that sometimes when you're in the political bubble, you can overread the consequences of these types of actions.
Yeah. I wrote down Alex Cole-Hamilton's "Come on, guys, we've got to get stuff done," and that was in reference, Andy, to your points about Kate Forbes, Deputy First Minister, etc., but also obviously applies to the budget process. And I actually just wondered, Geoff, if in there is something of not an election slogan necessarily, but some sort of message that the Lib Dems want to send out that, look, we're the ones that can get a government to do stuff for you. We will achieve things from our position. Do you think that's fit? Do you think that, am I reading too much into that?
No, I think that's the platform that they're going to take into the next election.
Yeah.
We got this. We delivered. even in opposition, we delivered, and we can do so much more. That's my point I'm making in my previous answer. You know, how do they view themselves as being able to do more? Would be potentially, you know, if the cards fall in a certain way, trying to get into government. Look, we're a long way to go, and perhaps his preferred option of being Deputy First Minister to Anna Sarwar will come to pass. Who knows what's going to happen? But I just don't think you should shut your options down at this stage, particularly given that, you know, we know that John Swinney and Kate Forbes are trying to rebrand it, so to speak, the SNP. I would wait and see where this thing stands, you know, in January, February time before I make any rash decisions. But there we are.